You have probably run the numbers on your own life at least once. What you earn, what rent takes, how long it would actually take to own something with your name on it. And the answer keeps landing in the same place, longer than you have. Here is a strange fact about that math. There was exactly one stretch of European history where it flipped completely, where an ordinary farmhand could name his price, walk off a job in the middle of harvest, and have 3 landowners chasing him down the road with better offers, where the pay of the poorest people alive climbed to a level that would not be reached again for 400 years. It started in October of 1347, when 12 ships tied up at a dock in Sicily. Almost everyone aboard was already dead. You know this story as the worst thing that ever happened to Europe. 25 million people gone in 5 years. A third of a continent, maybe half. And that is exactly what it was. But for the people who walked out the other side of it, it was also the single greatest windfall in the history of the European working class. So this file has 2 questions in it. The first one is how? How does the worst catastrophe in recorded history turn into the best thing that ever happened to the people who survived it? And the second one is the one that should actually bother you. If it happened again tomorrow, 8 billion of us, international airports, the whole modern machine, would you inherit a better world? Or is that door closed now? Let's open the file. Wait, hit subscribe and smash that like button before we continue. First, the version you already know. The plague moves faster than anyone can understand it. It comes up through the Mediterranean ports and into the trade roads, and it does not slow down for anything. England goes from roughly 4.8 million people to 2.6 million in 3 years. That is 46%. Florence has something like 120,000 people before it arrived. It had 50,000 after. Whole villages are simply crossed off the tax rolls, not reduced, removed. And then comes the part every textbook tells you next. With half the workers gone, the survivors suddenly had leverage. Labor was scarce, so labor got expensive. Wages went up. Serfdom fell apart because you cannot bind a man to your land when the manor down the road is offering him money and no questions. The old order cracked open. Ordinary people got richer, and the money sloshing around afterward helped pay for the Renaissance. And honestly, that story is airtight. It is the most basic idea in economics. Fewer workers, same amount of land. The price of work goes up. You do not need a degree to see it. A 14th century lord could see it, and he saw it immediately. So the wages went up. Except they didn't. Not that year. Not the next year. Not for 30 years. Here is what the wage records actually show. Real wages in England were already falling in the 1340s before the plague, and after the plague arrived, they kept falling, straight through the 1350s, straight through the 1360s. It is not until the late 1370s, almost 30 years after those ships docked in Sicily, that a working person's pay finally recovers, and only then does it shoot past where it had been before. 30 years. Half the population is gone in 5, and it takes 30 for the survivors to see a raise. So what was sitting in the gap? In 1349, with the plague still actively killing people, Edward III issued the Ordinance of Laborers. 2 years later, Parliament turned it into the Statute of Laborers. The law did 3 things. It froze wages at what they had been in 1346 before any of this started. It made it a criminal offense for a worker to ask for more than that. And this is the part that gets left out. It made it a criminal offense for an employer to pay more than that. Both sides. If a landowner wanted to outbid his neighbor for scarce labor, the state would prosecute him for it. It also went after your feet. You could not simply leave your parish to go find a better offer. Refusing available work at a fixed rate was itself an offense. Sit with what that is for a second. This is one of the earliest pieces of national economic legislation in English history. Parliament had just discovered it could reach into the entire country at once and set a price. And the very first thing it did with that power was make it a crime for a poor man to ask for a raise. And this was not a piece of paper that everybody ignored. Recent work going through the enforcement records from 1349 to 1400 finds the thing was actually prosecuted nationally for decades. So the market said, workers are scarce, pay them more, and the state said that is now illegal. For 30 years, the state won. In 1381, it broke. The trigger was a poll tax, a flat charge on every adult, the third one in 4 years, funding a war in France. But the grievance underneath it, the one that had been building since the plague, was the wage law. Tens of thousands of people walked to London. They took the tower. For about a week, it genuinely looked like the whole arrangement might come apart. Then their leader was killed in front of the king. The promises they had been given were cancelled within days, and the rest were hunted down. They lost. And here is the glitch. Within a decade, wages went up anyway. Not because anyone repealed the law, because a state in 1381 could pass a rule for 1 million private bargains, and it could not actually stand in 1 million barns and watch. The law stayed on the books and quietly stopped mattering. Pay drifted up. Serfdom in England thinned out and died, not by a grand act of liberation, but by 10,000 landlords deciding individually that an empty field was worse than an illegal wage. By the 1470s, English real wages hit a peak that would not be matched again until the 1880s. 400 years. That is how long nobody earned that much again. Now the part that decides everything. Because the plague did not only hit England, it went east too. Same bacterium, same labor shortage, same arithmetic, fewer hands, same land. And east of the river Elbe, it produced the exact opposite result. The landowners there ran into the same problem. Not enough people to work the ground, and they solved it the other way. Instead of paying more to attract scarce workers, they took the workers' freedom. Movement restricted. Obligations increased. A peasantry that had been lottery-free was pushed down into what historians call the second serfdom, and it was harsher than the first one had ever been. Not a hangover from the Middle Ages, a new thing built after the plague, because of the plague, and it was not the market that chose it. The research points at something much more uncomfortable. Rulers east of the Elbe needed money for armies, so they made a trade. The nobility got the peasants, total control over daily life on the estate, and the crown got its financing. The people were the payment. So run the two side by side. West of the Elbe, serfdom dies and the survivors eventually get rich. East of the Elbe, the survivors get owned. Same disease, same year, same math on the labor supply, and that split did not close. The income gap between Eastern and Western Europe that opened in those centuries was still widening into the 19th century, and you can still find its outline on a map today, which means the thing everybody believes about the Black Death is backwards. The plague did not hand anybody a raise. The plague did not liberate anyone. All the plague did was remove half the people and leave one question sitting on the table. Who gets the difference? Western Europe answered one way. Eastern Europe answered the other. And the answer was never in the biology. It was in who happened to be holding power when the bodies were counted. So, tomorrow. Start with the boring truth. The plague never actually left. Yersinia pestis is still out there, in rodent populations on 4 continents, and it still infects between 1 and 2,000 people every year. Around 95% of that is in Madagascar and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The United States gets about 10 cases a year, mostly in the Southwest. Antibiotics handle it if you get them in time. So a straight rerun of 1347 is not the scenario. That is not the interesting question anyway. The interesting question is the one underneath. If a third of us were gone in 5 years by anything, would the survivors inherit a richer world, the way medieval Europe eventually did? There are 3 reasons to think the medieval answer might not repeat. The first is that wealth changed shape. In 1350, Wealth was land, and land is completely useless without hands. A lord with 10,000 acres and nobody to work them owned a very large amount of nothing. That is the entire source of the peasant's leverage. Today, the biggest fortunes are equity, intellectual property, and increasingly capital that runs whether you show up or not. Scarce labor only becomes expensive when the capital is helpless without it. The second is that inheritance stopped flowing downward. In 1350, when a village lost half its people, the land opened up inside the village. Tenancies came free. Survivors moved onto better ground. The transfer went sideways and down. The transfer we have scheduled now goes the other direction. Something like $124 trillion moving between generations by 2048, with more than half of it coming out of the wealthiest 2% of households. A mass death event does not shuffle that deck. It just deals the same hand faster. And the third reason is that we already ran a small version of this experiment. Nothing remotely close in mortality. That comparison would be obscene. But 2020 through 2022 was a genuine shock to labor supply. And for about 2 years, it worked exactly like the medieval model. Wages at the bottom rose fast enough that economists measuring it found it had reversed roughly a quarter of 4 decades of widening wage inequality. And then the labor market loosened, and it started handing it back. The medieval version needed 30 years, a national wage law that failed, and a revolt that lost before the race stuck. Ours lasted about 2 years. Which brings us to the uncomfortable part, and I want you to be honest about it, because everyone does this. When you were imagining it, a third of people gone. Which one were you? Not morally, statistically. There is a version of this, where you are the one who inherits the house, and there is a version where you are the reason the house is available. A third of people is a very large number of people, and you pictured yourself inheriting, which is the part you were wrong about. But that is not really the question this file is about. The real one is this. Your country, is it west of the Elbe or east of it? Not on a map, in behavior. When the difference is sitting on the table and there are suddenly fewer of us and more to go around, does it go to the people who survived it, or does it go to the people who already had it? 14th century Europe got asked that question and split down the middle, and the answer took 400 years to fully play out. We would get our answer in about 2 years. History has glitches. We find them. Next file. In the summer of 1518, a woman stepped into a street in Strasbourg and started dancing. Within a month, there were 400 people dancing with her. Some of them did not stop until they died. And when the city council sat down to deal with it, they decided the cure was more dancing. So they hired musicians and they built a stage. That is not a legend. That is in the city records. File closed. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one.